Welcome, everyone, to the Brand Fortress HQ podcast. I'm your host, John Stojan, along with my co-hosts, Matt Atkins and Mike Kaufman. And today we have another brand builder episode for you. Our guest today is Irena Todd, co-founder and CEO of Blue Zebra Brands, a house of brands building clean and natural personal care products. She's got a handful of brands, and her company was selected for the Telluride Venture Accelerator, Burt's Bees Launchpad, has been featured on CNBC, Fast Company, and the Wall Street Journal, among others, along with a bunch of other accomplishments. Irina, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And I know that was just a quick overview of a lot of different things that you do. If you could give, a little bit of background as to how you got into having a house of brands and kind of your experiences that have led up to this point.
Hi, John and everyone. Thanks for having me. I'll try to do it briefly, but the journey has been 10 years long already. I'll start with a little bit of a step back. My background is in consumer packaged goods. I got my training in the bulk of my career at Unilever, running really large personal care brands. My first brand was Degree Men and then Degree Women. My now co-founder and I actually launched Axe Hair together when men's hair care didn't exist in stores. I also was part of the M&A team that brought on Tresemme to Unilever and managed Tresemme for a couple of years, locally and globally. So kind of the crux of my background and kind of the start of the story is that I love building brands and love the idea of building a product around an emotional insight and then connecting with an audience in a meaningful way. Our company started with kind of the standard founder problem. You want to come up with a solution using your skill sets and background. My co-founder and I were both having kids and felt like, as well as knew kind of on the insider track, that big companies were not paying attention to the kids segment in particular in personal care. You have a huge baby set, huge adult set, but kids is kind of lost in the middle. And there are really no brands that cater to that segment. And yet it's 6 times bigger than baby. And so we felt like, we were searching for brands on our own and didn't want to use Unilever products on our kids. And so we felt like, okay, this seems like a good opportunity. It's a little bit under the radar and feels like a good territory to develop a brand that really connects to consumers and kids in particular. That segment is really special. So that's how we started with just that idea. We went to an accelerator program in Telluride. We moved there for 5 months, and that can be an episode in its own. It was really fun and also a great way to start a company, because not only did it make us quit our regular jobs to go start a company, but also it ends with a big demo day where we presented to almost 100 investors and got our funding and just got things off the ground. It was a really great way to start a company. Anyhow, that was the beginning. And the idea was, how do we launch this kids personal care brand? The brand is called Fresh Monster. A year after the program, we launched it. And the idea is, again, to be the head to toe personal care brand for your kids as they go through different stages. When they start getting dirty and messy, our products deliver. And the kind of foundation of the brand, it's not just how do we connect to kids in that segment, but also how do the products meet their needs. And so our product philosophies are basically very clean, natural products that also work really well, kind of pulling from the Unilever background of products have to work.
Right.
So anyhow, that was kind of the beginning. I'll stop here just to see where you want to go. And I can tell you how, the journey continued, but that was really the impetus. We started with one particular segment, one brand, and went from there.
If you wouldn't mind, I have just kind of a question before John digs in here. And that is, we really our focus very much is on trying to convince Amazon sellers that they really need to focus on that branding aspect of things. It's been for a long time, it was pretty easy to just kind of throw products up on Amazon and sell them and make money. And so there's a lot of people in this space who that's kind of what they did. To be honest, in some ways, it's kind of what I did. I kind of fell into a brand, and it just kind of materialized. But, that idea of kind of building that brand and building that brand recognition and that loyalty and that sort of thing, what, if you could kind of put that a little bit into a nutshell in terms of that process, like let's say you don't really have a brand, maybe you have a product, but you don't have a brand. Like, what would you do with that? Like, what thinking process should you walk through to figure out what that brand might look like?
I love this question. And again, it could be a podcast on its own.
Absolutely.
Because it's, a very meaningful meaty topic. And obviously, what a lot of the MBA programs teach you, as well as Unilever training. And really at the base of it all is think about the brands that you know. And even when you look at their P&L and balance sheets, the brand has a value, like a monetary value. And there's a reason for that, right? The reason for that is that if you have a brand and loyalty, that means you're not constantly battling it out for new customers. And you're not constantly thinking about how is somebody going to undercut me and how am I going to survive? Building a brand is just a long-term proposition to connect to consumers on an emotional level. The products have to deliver, but really it's an emotional connection. And in a nutshell, when we thought about building a brand, and generally when companies try to build a brand, they think about, yes, there's a problem we're trying to solve. But beyond that, what is this value proposition? Why am I existing and how am I going to connect to the consumers? What is this emotional hook that I'm going to have where people are going to feel like I have space as a brand in their lives and they're not going to keep shopping for whatever the cheaper item is next time around? And so, that can be so many different things. There's like a whole stream of work that's done around consumer insight. And that's essentially what am I satisfying? What's the problem I'm solving for, but also what's the emotional hook I'm trying to create with this consumer? For us in particular, we were really building a brand around the fact that kidhood is kind of like this messy, awkward period, right? And so if we went about building a brand just around product solution, then we'd be like, okay, kids are really dirty, they have tangly hair, let's create a product that solves that. And we would look like probably anybody on there, and we would be duking it out on price forever and probably wouldn't be around anymore. Instead, what we try to do is think about, okay, how do we create something meaningful in their lives? And what are some of these emotional hooks? So I'll give you an example of what that looked like for us. We thought about kidhood as this age of awkwardness and really caring about what other kids maybe think and being very influenced by media and by all these stereotypical ideas of what a girl should be, what a boy should be, what kidhood should look like. And so we really wanted to create something that was disrupting that, and in essence, disrupting some of these traditional beauty standards for kids and girls in particular, but also generally thinking about kidhood as this wonderful, magical time where kids can be who they are. So when you look at our fresh monsters, our monsters in the packaging are weird and quirky, and they're missing teeth and eyes, and they just look, they look all different and weird and cool. And that's what we wanted to represent. We wanted to represent that kidhood and that kind of emotional pull of be who you are, right? Be the awkward, quirky kids that you are and be proud of that. And so if you think of it that way, all of a sudden it's like, wow, like I'm feeling emotional about it because I want my kids to be who they are. I don't want them to, just wear princess outfits and just be into kind of the stereotypical stuff that the big media and, that we're getting bombarded by. And so that felt like a really unique emotional space.
Well, I was just going to ask, because I think that that's such a powerful concept. And Mike, I'm so glad you asked that question. When you guys were building Fresh Monster and even the brands beyond that you guys work on now, what are some of the indicators that you look for that brand message is really resonating as you build your brand and target that audience?
When we started building Fresh Monster, we started with a few concepts, and the concepts were around these emotional territories that felt resonant to us as moms. So we are the audience. If you aren't the audience, you'd want to do this work with people who actually would be eventually using your products and loving your brand, and just test a few territories. There's some tools you can use around different emotional drivers. You can just Google them and you'll see there's different ways you can go about developing these concepts. But we started with 3, and, I remember another one that was all around super me. So, celebrating kind of the doing your best as a kid and, completely different space, more about empowerment and going for it versus kind of this authenticity and being yourself and being okay, being strange and weird and cool. Totally different territory, right? So you can play with different territories. And then we showed it to a lot of moms, a ton of them, and just saw what resonated. So before we even started talking about brand name or anything really, that's where we started. That was kind of the first blueprint of where the brand was going to go. And then once we've gotten kind of this pulse on, oh, wow, this seems like a really rich territory, then we did a few other thought processes around, okay, can this come to life? Can this come to life in a brand name, in packaging? Can this be advertised? Does this have legs, in the commerce space? Could this be translated to something that is also products? And then from there, obviously, you now have guardrails, right? And then you keep building the brand based on those.
One of the challenges that Amazon sellers that we see a lot of them fall into is using these tools to look for search volume on Amazon to see how many products have this many reviews and are doing X amount of revenue. And the challenge with that is that I personally in coaching roles have had students, 12 of them, come to me with the exact same product because they were using the exact same tools and the exact same filters. What you've described, and this is what I tried to get to them, you said it so much more eloquently, is instead of choosing a product based on a filter, choose a person first. And once you choose a person, in most cases, I am the person that I end up selling products to. And what makes that easy for me is to put myself in the shoes of the consumer and to ask the question, what is a product that can not only enhance my life, but solve a problem for me? And building a brand around a person as opposed to a product is so much easier. And you so many things that you said, because you were able to take that to a group of moms and ask, like, does this resonate with you? So for me, there was a Facebook group that had a whole bunch of barbecue, like aficionados, not just guys that were grilling for their kids on the weekend. Like, these are the guys that are out checking their brisket at 2:00 in the morning. And I had this group of people that I could ask these questions to. And it was because I was focused on that person as opposed to an individual product. And I resonated a lot with what you were talking about with what you did with the moms.
Yeah, that's not to say you shouldn't be using Product Explorer and all that stuff to figure out, how many people are searching what you're doing. But you're right. That's kind of that's later on. That's your go-to-market strategy, right? Versus here's a product that has room in the world because it meets a need. And that's where you start. And then you figure out what channel makes sense for me. And maybe Amazon doesn't, right? And maybe it does. I would say in general, Amazon is great for, products that are already searched. And somehow you have found a way to connect in a different way or a more meaningful way or have some benefit to offer that's not existing already. Otherwise, you'll be just duking it out on price. For products that are new to the world, Amazon's not great for that because then you need to generate demand, and generating demand on Amazon that's really not what the channel is for. Then you may want to consider building out your brand, I don't know, through independent channel, retail channel, or through your own website if the financials make sense. So really you start with the idea, and then channel is kind of, the go-to-market strategy and not the actual starting point.
Yeah, it's really hard to educate a consumer on Amazon, that's for sure.
Well, and that's such a valuable point, right? Because, I do think there's maybe almost this dichotomy, like you've got the individuals who are just using the tools to figure out, what products could I sell that there's space, and not really paying attention to, having an actual, target customer avatar and things like that. But then you've also got people who maybe they have an idea for a very new product, that really doesn't exist out there, which there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. It's risky, but it's a thing. But as you said, Amazon typically is not going to be the place where you want to do that unless like it's kind of a new product, right? Like there is a template for it over here. I'm just making a really different version of it that people might like better. But if this is a brand new thing that nobody even knows that they might need, Amazon is not the place for that. And if that's what you're doing, like if you're watching this podcast and you're like, hey, I got this great idea and I think Amazon's a wonderful place to sell it because there's so many people, be careful with that because you could lose your shirt, because the only way that you're going to educate people on Amazon is with a massive amount of money because it's all ads. And you don't even know what keywords to target. It's kind of a mess. It strikes me that when you're in that category with pets, that there is maybe a lot of opportunity on social, to generate kind of that community aspect of the brand. And then, you can funnel that wherever you want in terms of the sales channel. But
Yes, completely. I mean, same for kids too, right? There's just a lot of passionate parents, a lot of passionate dog parents. UGC does really well for that. And in general, yes, engagement in social media is super helpful. And again, it goes back to how do I present the brand and connect with where the consumers are. And so, yes, if they're spending a lot of time watching dog videos, which they are, then TikTok makes a lot of sense. I will also say dog owners still really love their local pet store. They really do. They trust them. They go for recommendations. There's a human. They can help them figure out what's happening. Why is their dog itching so much? It's just a different kind of consumer journey. And so meeting them where they are is all of it, right? And so that's why, back to what Matt was saying, if you start with that consumer and then think about where are they shopping, what are they doing, then you can think about thoughtfully, how do I intersect my brand in those moments and make sure that I'm relevant to their life.
And now that you have your audiences pretty much dialed in, where does the decision on what channel to sell a particular product idea, where does that come into the mix for you? Is it at the beginning? Do you think of the channel first? Do you think of the product first and then try to pick the perfect channel for it? How does that work for you?
Channel is further down the line from here's who I'm going after, here's my consumer, here's my audience, here's my value proposition. And then channel. It's a function of many things. First one, I'd say the biggest one is just price. That's kind of the basic one. But if you're a very high priced item, then you're, kind of universe of marketplaces, retail stores is smaller. If you're a value price item, very different. Also, if you have a specific category that plays really well in independent channel, like pet category, right? Then you'd consider that. And again, price is a big one. If you're, very value price, well, maybe the mass channels are going to be really hard for you because there's so many others that are much bigger and have much bigger budgets. So there's price for me is always one of the big ones, is which channel makes sense. And obviously figuring out what the competition is doing. That's kind of the first one. And then from there, we think about, okay, can we win in that channel with this price point and our proposition? Can we win? And for a small company, we look at profitability very closely. And so retail channel in particular is an expensive one. I mean, not that Amazon is not, but retail is sneaky expensive because, there's so many fees that you don't even know are going to slam you until you're there. And to get into retail, there's just so much cash needed to build up the inventory and prepare for everything, sometimes slotting, beverage for sure. Right? There's just so much cash up front. And then you get into retail and then you realize, oh, wow, this is, so expensive. Makes Amazon look good. So that, there's kind of that thought process for a smaller company who's profit driven or really careful about profitability. There's definitely brands that don't care about that. And all they're going for is market share. And if that's the case, then you need to have deep pockets or, investors behind you. And that's a way to gain market share and then hopefully get the profitability eventually. But we know in today's world, that's really hard and probably not, not a path for most.
Well, and you mentioned profitability, and especially for brands that, like you said, don't have deep pockets, is so important, where they have to strike that balance of not only being competitive, but also growing the brand, from an inventory standpoint, product development, and a lot of other things. What are some of those kind of key performance indicators that you're looking for from a systematic approach in order to be profitable with a brand as it grows?
I'd say we're pretty focused on data and metrics. That's a big one. So being really thoughtful about every element of the P&L, but also the cash flow. So just having a careful eye on all of those and actually having that information, right? A lot of people kind of fudge it and think they know what they're making or where their money is going. But that's really, it requires kind of thoughtful process and then diligence to make sure you're actually collecting all the data. It's a big one, right? Because if you can be thoughtful about that even before you launch your products, then you're just better set up to succeed when things get rolling versus you've already launched. And then now you're figuring out, where's my money? Like, where did it go? Why didn't I get this? That's a much more stressful approach. But even still, I would say at any point in your journey of launching products, running products, building brands, having that knowledge of what is my individual item making and exactly what is happening in every channel for that particular item to the dollar. That's kind of the ultimate, right? Because then you know truly what is my potential with this item. And that changes, right? If you're selling on Amazon versus if you're selling on another marketplace, on Shopify or in a retail store. So we have detailed P&Ls by item, by channel, with every little bucket filled out, including, that shrink wrap that your, 3PL is putting, or the extra box they're putting in, whatever it is, it's on there. And so once you have the visibility, it's just really, it's empowering, because then you can say, all right, I understand that these particular products might have a problem, right? It's a leaky bucket. How can we fix this? What's in this P&L that we can fix that maybe is not going to hurt the brand? Or you can see opportunities. Wow, this product is crushing it. This margin is amazing. If we can double this one, our cash flow is going to double, right? So just having those levers and that are, based on what money you're bringing in is just pretty empowering.
Irena, when you started each of these individual brands, did you start with an endpoint in mind in terms of, okay, we really want to get this product to retail, or we really want to get this product to, XYZ, but this is the pathway to get there. Like, maybe we can't go there yet, but this is the path to get there. And whether you did or didn't, did any of that play a role into making decisions about what is my price point going to be and what profitability level do I need to be at in order to be able to accomplish that?
That's such a good question, and one that I think everybody should be thinking about as they're thinking about launching anything, and in particular around price. So originally, when we built the brand, like I said, once we've kind of had the basics of it, the next biggest question was price. And price was in the context of, where is this going to be? Both from the mission of how far do we want this brand to go? How big do we want it to get? How meaningful do we want it to be in people's households? And so from the beginning, we said we want to be a household name, and we wanted our pricing to be affordable for that particular reason. So we can be in as many places as possible. And that was the prototype around, okay, can we make this happen given the product brief that we have? Can we be at this price point and also offer super natural, clean products that work really well? That was kind of the crux of it all. We had to crack all of that. And as part of that mass pricing, yes, we thought, okay, retail's got to be part of it. Some of it is our Unilever training too, like growing fast is the fastest way is to go into mass retail. And about 80% of all personal care is done in like 3 retailers in mass retail.
Right.
So that was always on the map. And we tested with Target and Walmart. They were both very intrigued with this idea of, wow, we don't have a kid segment. And we found that, while that's definitely still something we want to do eventually, and hopefully maybe when we sell, Unilever can do that because they already have infrastructure. What we found was that it was incredibly expensive. We did not anticipate all the costs that actually came. Again, same kind of thought around, oh, you just plop it into retail, right? It's going to be, I've done the calculation. The margins are good. We're going to make this work. But we found that, no, it's actually really expensive. And we either had to keep fundraising to subsidize that kind of retail growth, which meant all kinds of implications, right? If you keep fundraising, that's a very stressful journey. Or we can focus on more profitable channels for now, because we are a small brand, and kind of grow the snowball a little bit slower. And then maybe leave the retail as meat on the bone for eventually when we sell, or when we get big enough and our budget is big enough, then we can actually tackle. So it's great to start with it, right? With some thoughts around it. But some of it is you just don't know, like until you're in there and figuring out that, okay, whatever this profit margin I thought it was at the beginning, really it's a lot thinner or non-existent at all.
And do you feel then, in terms of that initial attempt at retail and then kind of the pulling back on that, do you feel that there, I feel like there's somewhat of a dichotomy there in the sense that there's this decision of we want to be a household name. And so therefore we want to be a fairly affordable brand because otherwise we're only going to be, on the shelves of people who have considerable resource. But by doing so, you do put yourself in a position where moving into retail is a much more difficult path forward because the profitability on the product is smaller, obviously, than on a higher priced product. And so you don't have as much room, to do the discounting that retailers are normally going to be expecting and to, as you indicated, have the cash reserves and resources to address all of those additional fees and things that come down the pipe that you don't even know are coming. So how do you feel about that at this point in time? Would you go back and change the pricing models to make it easier to get on retail? Do you feel like you wouldn't? How do you feel about that?
I think that retail is important to crack for us eventually. The way we go about it has changed. I mean, as we were doing retail, we were also on Amazon, and that's also where general population is, right? And so being priced where we're at and building the brand that we have, we got tons of traction and have had since the beginning. We've been growing year over year pretty significantly, which, it makes us feel like, yes, we're building a household name anyways. Now, what does that mean for retail? We did stick around in retailers that were willing to play ball, right? That were willing to not force us to do certain things like promotions and deep discounts and things like that. We stayed with those retailers, and those are the kind of retailers we're, always open to talking to. Right. I'm referring to more bigger box, Targets, Walmarts of the world, where you don't have that kind of negotiating power because you're teeny tiny. And generally you're competing with, massive brands who have, such deep relationships that probably those brands are building out the shelf for the retailer. Yeah. Like we did at Unilever. Like sometimes we were category captains and we were designing the entire shelf. It's very hard to, as a teeny little brand, how are you going to come in and say, how about me?
Right, me too, right?
And, the answer going higher pricing is often the wrong answer because then it makes it even harder to compete. How are you going to compete with, household names that are half your price? It's very hard. So, being at the right price point is critical. I don't think you can mess with that. Really, you just need to think about, can I deliver? Can my go-to-market strategy deliver to that and still be profitable? What are the conditions? And maybe the conditions are certain retailers really want to develop the segment and are willing to bet on me and are willing to waive some of the crazy fees.
Right.
To work.
Well, I think what's really interesting about kind of your journey that you were talking about there to me is that, one of the things we talk about, obviously, a lot of our listeners are Amazon and looking at other channels as Amazon gets more crowded, gets more expensive and that type of things. And then the other thing, circling back to what we talked about at kind of the beginning of this episode, which is if we're really focusing on building a brand, that means that, Amazon can be a good place to start for some brands, but it's not the finishing line. And it's, looking at other channels in order to continue to grow the brand and not those types of things. What I find just really interesting about what you said was, so it sounds like you were in Target and Walmart, some of those big box stores, didn't work out based on what you saw from the numbers. And so you pivoted your strategy and then, but also just based on your background and experience, know that, further down the line, there'll be another opportunity for that because I feel like there's a lot of fear around like, oh, well, if I don't make this my one big shot with Target or Walmart or whatever that big box store is work, then I'm never going to have this shot again. So I'm curious, if there's any of that, what that looked like or how you think about that discussion for your situation and how do you think brands should think about that as they test out other, channels like whether it be big box stores or other retail channels?
Well, I will say that selling into retail is the easiest job ever. Like getting on shelf is really easy. But making money on shelf is really, really hard. That's kind of the crux of it all, right? The way these big retailers work is they have very young buyers. They're usually in their 20s and they're, making decisions on a certain desk say they're in hair care for a couple of years, and then they move on to the next category, maybe baby, maybe apparel, whatever. And so the shelf life of a buyer is really fast. And so the opportunity to sell in is always there. It just requires somebody who really gets what you're doing. And more importantly, when the retailer is focusing on your category. If they're saying, I really want to develop this pool category and have some more premium offerings, well, that's a really good match, right? So if the retailer strategy is matching yours, that's excellent. And that's sometimes time and luck, right? Like you just don't know what the corporate initiatives are, what they're doing. And so I always say, stay in touch, always be in touch with the buyers, be in touch with what they're doing, what their priorities are. And, keep checking in. And, once there's a match between their initiatives, their priorities, what you deliver, then you can negotiate, right? Then you have a better chance at creating the conditions that you need to be successful in retail. And then I'll say, if you have time to build up your brand, again, if you're going into mass and you're an unknown brand, that's going to be really hard. How are people going to find you unless you have big budgets, right? To advertise or to have a big social media campaign. It's going to be really hard for people to find you. And therefore, your velocities are not going to be high enough and Target is going to kick you out in 3 months, right? But if you maybe start smaller, start with retailers, again, that get you and prove yourself out and build your brand on Amazon and other marketplaces. And all of a sudden, people have heard of you and you have a social media presence and a community, then it becomes a little bit easier. I just think it's so tough to resist the siren call of mass retail because, in a jiffy, you get massive volumes, but learn from my experience, right? Like what matters is what are you going to bring home? The big revenue is not really that relevant. What's more relevant is how much money are you actually going to make? And is this sustainable? In particular, if you're building something to stick around. Right? Like if you're trying to build something that's going to be around for a while, and brands just take time. You cannot build a brand in 2 months or 2 years.
I like that you point out that timing matters, and but also that if you miss it this time around, like there's always another opportunity because those buyers are always moving on. I mean, you sell in a particular category, that buyer who, maybe you screwed this particular opportunity up, they're going to move on in a couple of years. They're not even going to be there. Somebody else is going to move in. They have no idea that interaction even happened. So you have that opportunity again. And also, as you said, the strategy of the company themselves, or of that division of the company is going to change over time. And so maybe at this point, they don't want a premium product on the shelf, and 2 years from now, maybe that's exactly what they want on the shelf. So there's always that opportunity that's going to come back around as long as you're willing to wait for it and keep looking for it.
And a quick question for you. I'm looking to get into a category now that it's not Amazon native, like every other brand that I've created, every other physical product brand that I've created. I'm looking to get in the beverage category, which we've already talked about is about as cutthroat as you can get. What are some other places? I mean, we already know we know that non-alcohol beverages are a trend right now. We also know that functional beverages are a trend. We're kind of combining those two, which we feel is something that not really a lot of people are doing, but we feel like that because of some things that we've done. But, I like to make decisions more based on data than a feeling. So what are some places that brands that aren't necessarily looking to launch on Amazon right away, because we already know which tools we can look at kind of search demand? What are some other places that brands can go look to see what kind of consumer trends are? Like what are people buying at the grocery stores? What are people buying at like natural grocers and things like that? Is there a place? Is there like a data store that you can go look at?
There are ways to get all that data. It's not free, unfortunately, and there are no third-party apps that can hack your way into that, and they're usually pretty protected. So Nielsen is a really big one, and those are really expensive. And then Spins report in particular, that's for natural channel. That's a really good one as well. And both of those will tell you exactly what you're looking for. How big is the category? Who are the players? Velocities, pricing. They'll give you the data landscape of what's happening. You can probably figure some of the stuff out on your own too, just by going to, 5 Sprouts and 5 Vitamin Cottage and go to the natural channel first. And you'll see what they're stocking at what price point and what's shelved fully and what's actually turning. right? Like that's kind of a good sense of, here's the category, here's a non-alc category. Are all of them fully stocked? Are there some brands that are actually like really selling through? Are all of them on deal all the time? Right? There's kind of, it's data. It's a little bit less of a spreadsheet analysis kind of data, but it's hardcore data. Like you're seeing actually what's selling or what's not selling and why it's on deal all the time and not, not needing to replenish. And then, in general with beverage, it's all about test and trial versus, kind of really honing in and figuring out what my velocity is going to be before you can run. And that means partnering with, a smaller store that maybe has 10 doors and then just figuring out where should I be in store and what are my velocities looking like? Because if you can crack that, then it's much easier to run. But until you crack that part, that's the hardest part with food in particular, because there's just so much churn and so much innovation, and they charge you for slotting. So it's really expensive to test and learn. So yeah, I would start small. And then the big one with food and beverage in particular is sampling. You just got to get it to people and have them try. And maybe that means going into coffee shops to start with and just getting tons of data on that way, figuring out, are people loving this? And obviously coffee shop is a channel in its own, but just easier to get the data before you have to pay those big slotting bills.
Cool. Good tips.
So Irina, we've covered a lot on, brand and different channels and that type of stuff. I guess as we kind of wrap up here, is there anything around brand that, if you, especially listeners that maybe, they're selling 6 to 7 figures on Amazon, maybe they've tested some different channels, they really want to invest in this brand piece. Are there anything else that we haven't covered so far that you think would be really important for them to maybe think about or maybe know as they think about, really building out that brand that's going to emotionally connect with their customers?
Maybe the only other thing that's worth mentioning is having a deep innovation pipeline. We haven't talked about that yet, but if you have a mission like us to be the head to toe personal care brand for kids or snout to tail, right? If you have that kind of vision that my brand is going to be the go-to place for this, then there has to be a pretty robust innovation pipeline. And then innovation pipeline kind of goes back to the basics. What are my consumers looking for? What need am I meeting? How my product is going to deliver this better than the competition? How does it fit into my overall portfolio? That's probably another big one. And, innovation takes time to develop. For us in particular, we test the heck out of it before we launch anything. In particular, because there's no, once there's reviews, there's no, oh, oopsies, let me go fix it. So doing that work ahead of time is really, really helpful. So having that innovation pipeline, I'd say like 3-year pipeline, and constantly revising it, testing and working on it is part of fueling that growth. In particular, as you'll see opportunities in some channels that maybe don't fit Amazon, but maybe fit some other channels. And so having the innovation pipeline is helpful with that, because then you can deploy different, products to different channels as well. It just opens up your arsenal of things you can do and how you can grow if you have a robust kind of roadmap of what else we want to develop that fits into everything that we're doing.
Okay. Well, I think in that combination with our conversation around channels and brands gives a lot for our listeners to think about. I just want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and your time, and really enjoyed the conversation today.
Good to talk to you all, and good luck with the beverage brand, Matt.
Thank you, Irena.
Thank you so much.